Okay, so it's my great pleasure to introduce Marianne Mills. She was my lecturer when I trained to be a teacher way back. And I don't even know what it was called then. What was it called then? Wellington College of Education? Yeah. So she was fabulous social sciences, inspired me to be a fantastic social sciences teacher, to go out and use the real world and bring that into your teaching. So it feels really nice to be able to introduce Marianne to you. So she's now a senior facilitator at Core Education. Her interests in curriculum design and future focused are always fascinating. I went to one of her sessions at URED a couple of years ago and it was fantastic. So I know that we're all going to get great information and be inspired, and I'm sure she'll challenge us to think about where is education going and how can we provide the best education for our learners. So thank you very much. So, thank you, Marianne.
Well, tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you, Joe. You realise you've been around for a while and you come to a conference like this and you run into people that you taught as a teacher, you run into people that you lectured, and there's quite a number of you. And what's great to see as a lecturer in pre-service teacher education is to finally see now some of you rising up into positions of influence and positions of leadership. And of course then there's those that I work with alongside in the ministry, and of course those of you that, some of you in here that I'm actually working with at the moment. Today I'm going to I hopefully challenge you a bit over the next hour, and particularly to get you to think that you're all in roles in schools that are incredibly important for not just your own future, but particularly for the students in your schools. And so we're going to transgress over a few things, and I'm going to every now and again stop and give you a chance to talk to each other. But I want to build quite a bit on Steve Mahari, that I think yesterday gave us the big picture, and today I just want to bring it down a little bit to sort of contextualise, I think, more around what you're doing. I'm from South Canterbury, born and brought up in Timaru, educated there. And when you look at the past, this is my father's past. He was a grain and seed merchant. And when you think of some of the things that he taught me to chew wheat. And I could, for many years, tell you when wheat was actually ready to harvest. Of course, these days they use sophisticated, technology and things. Of course, it's a piece of learning that actually is totally irrelevant now and never needed. That's his office there in Timaru. That building still stands. And he was a fourth generation New Zealander. I'm a fifth generation. So that's kind of my beginnings. And then you think, well, when I started school in Timaru, the first thing I was given on my first day was a slate. And so when you think sometimes when kids start school today, they also get a slate, but it's a slightly different slate. But what we've got to challenge ourselves with, are they using it to the capacity at which that first slate that I was given to what my granddaughter here is about to start school in about 2 months' time. She's already pretty good actually on one of those types of devices and things. And so when we're looking at and thinking about curriculum, we have to think about curriculum just not for today, but also what this might look like in the future. And I've skipped a couple of slides there because Steve Mahari yesterday talked to you about what some of the changing jobs are and keeping our focus particularly on some of the skills and capabilities and knowledge and values that our children are going to need to be successful in this world that he talked about. And so that's kind of what I'm going to go sort of through today. Now you'll notice that this presentation was talked about designing future-focused curriculum. And it's interesting to see, is this a word that's been in our vocabulary for most of our lives? Well, I went on to Google, Google Newgram Viewer, and you'll see there that, of course, actually, it's a word that's really been used in, probably from the 1970s. So some of you that have been in teaching for quite some time never had to think about future focus because actually it wasn't there. But you can see as you look at that graph through to the 2000s how it has been used. Now, one of the things when you think about curriculum, it can be an awfully dry subject, right? And it's good that so many of you have turned up at 8:30 in the morning. But what I want you to think about today, that every decision that you make and every decision that your school makes impacts on a student. Every decision. And I do a lot of work in schools, and I hear so often that 80% are going on to university, or 60% are going on to university, or whatever percent are going on to university. And when I look at the curriculum, that's what is the focus of those kids are really well looked after. But actually, there are many, many other kids in your schools who are not necessarily on those pathways. So I want you to personalise a bit today about the curriculum in your school. And I want you to think about kids on the edge. Those kids that sometimes we may not be catering for as well with our offerings. And so I'm going to tell you some stories today, and I need some water. You can probably tell that. And these 5 students here are all students who are amazing young adults, but they didn't always have an amazing time at school. And so I'm going to run through these at times. So there's 3 things that I want you to leave thinking about today. Your students and what they need, because it's not the same as the neighbour who sits beside you. The curriculum that your students are able to access, and what that looks like on a school level, because you are school curriculum leaders. All right? And thirdly, I want you to think about your leadership and your role, and how you can influence and lead what happens in your school. Okay, now the theme for this conference I think works rather nicely because it runs through these things. It talks about you, your colleagues, your students, your community, and future global environment. And you'll see as I go through this, the first thing you have to look after is yourselves and know who you are and what you're doing. And you'll see later when I come through to look at curriculum that it's actually whānau, and students are in that bottom ring as well. So the connections that you make here, or connections that you make in your own school and community, of course, what are you doing with those and how are you bringing them into your school? So let's have a look at your role for a start. What sort of a leader are you in terms of curriculum? Are you one that's going round in circles all the time? Okay, that actually we keep on reinventing wheels. We keep on doing the same thing. We keep on perhaps changing the fish, but we still keep going round in a circle. Or are you ones that's over there on the far side where actually you don't know where you're going? In fact, sometimes you're going this way, sometimes you're going the other way, but you're all doing that, just not you. Or are you actually the green fish there and actually leading with others sort of floating around beside you? Or are you a fish out of water? Now, I want everybody in this room to stand up who has responsibility for leading curriculum in their school. So, why is everybody not standing? Hang on, you've got to stay seated because there's another question, standing, there's another question coming. Because, you see, what sort of a definition are you giving yourselves about what curriculum is in your school? Because isn't it everybody's job? Curriculum is not what kids do just between 9 and 3 and whatever. So those that are standing, the next question is, how many of you, now sit down, but stay standing if you have had some professional learning on designing curriculum at a school level, at that sort of top sort of level. How many of you have had some professional learning? Now, if you haven't, sit down. Now, if you look around this room, we've probably lost 2/3 of the people in the room. You can all sit down there if you like. Now, you think what we're asking of you as leaders of curriculum in schools. Many of you have come from being HODs, probably all of you, right? Some of you may be so clever that you jumped and you never became an HOD. Didn't you, Karen? So when you think of an HOD and the narrowness of how you looked at what was important. I was a history teacher. I can remember when I came an HOD at Heriton College, I went into the principal and told him I wasn't having anybody the next year who did not have a social science degree, was not going to be teaching history, geography or social studies. And he looked at me and said, Marianne, so do I have to make some people redundant? And it was only later on I kind of understood that he actually had, people that did not have enough on their programs. But as you've moved up into the next layer, you've got a new job. You've got a new job to look at the whole horizon, not just one star in that horizon. And so when you think you end up in these positions, you're asked to start designing curriculum. We are all in self-managing schools. There is nowhere, anywhere that tells you this is what you must do and this is how it's done and this is how long each thing should be. Yes, we have a national curriculum, but it's a framework. So what have you done to upskill yourselves to think about what it means to design? Kept a bit quiet. So perhaps you've got this role, that you're the architect in the school. You're the big thinker about curriculum. You see everything and you work with your leadership team and your role is as the architect. You throw things down on paper, you throw things up to discuss, you draw things out, you try and look for coherence, you try and look for networks and things across. Is that your role? Or are you the project manager, the technician, the person that doesn't engage necessarily in the high level thinking but puts things into practice? Now you need both, actually, in schools. In some schools I've worked in, they're all architects, which means no one ever does any work or want to do any work. But in fact, if you're all project managers, nobody's doing the big thinking. What does this look like? Where are we going? What's going to happen? So I want you to think clearly to yourselves now and talk to your neighbour as your role as a senior leader. What are you? What do you think you are here? So I'll just give you a minute so I can have some water for you to just... Okay, thank you. I won't ask you to put up your hands of how many think you're architects and how many think you're actually the project managers, because some of you will say, well, actually at times you hold both roles. But what I want you to see, do you see yourself in a role? That's the critical piece here. And so when you think of the way that your leadership team works, and thinking about, we're talking about designing future-focused curriculum, this is what this is about. So what do things look like in your school? How does your actual hierarchy work in terms of when we come to look at future-focused design and what we're looking for? Well, actually, how do you operate as a team? And are you, as things were, or are you more networked in the way that you work as a team, or do you actually, the far side, the way we're sort of looking at and working there? And so I want to show you a video here. This is a promotional video, and I know there's a person here that may have been involved in this. It's a promotional video that was put out for Hobsonville schools. a few years back. And as you watch it, I want you to think, okay, so what's this trying to portray as a school to a community about what their curriculum is about? Okay, so as you watch it, I want you to think, what are they trying to portray? Okay, well, have a look at this. It's about 3 minutes long. So, just say to your neighbour, just give them 3 words from what you saw from that tells you that what they're trying to convey about them at being future focused. Okay, so just give you a minute quickly. What are some of the words you'd use? Okay, thank you. Now, I'm not going to ask you to feedback because I've done this many times and I know the sorts of words. Most of them begin with C, connected, collaborative, whatever, the communication. And yes, I know the teacher isn't wearing a helmet, we're all well aware of that. I'm sure, who didn't see that? But I'm sure that some of those sorts of words and things were coming through cross-curricular, trying to show, that was, connected, whatever. Now, okay, so now talk to the person next to you, preferably not someone in your own school, but if I walked into your school today and you show me the video about your curriculum that, I could expect my grandchild to come in and experience, what would I see? What words would you use now to your neighbour to describe your curriculum at the moment? Maybe the same words. Look, some of you work in schools like that, but... All right, thank you. Okay, hands up those who had exactly the same words as you had for the previous video. Ah, no one, sort of. Yeah, half and half, yeah. Yeah, and I bet there's some different words that don't begin with C. I bet that some of you had a word that began with T. Often people say, well, we've got a traditional curriculum, whatever that might mean. But obviously, but just keep that in your head. What is it? If I walk in, if I go onto your website, that's real fun. You go into school websites, secondary school websites, and you try and find really what they stand for and what their curriculum is. Is it future focused? I won't find that, but I'll certainly find their uniforms. I'll find what time the bells go, all sorts of other things, but I might struggle to find exactly what you are trying to convey to a community about what your curriculum offers to its students and as part of its community. Now, of course, these are some of the words you see that you may have come up with, and many of you will be, in terms of your curriculum, in terms of things, you'll have some of these words, and this is just some of the work that's come out of the World Education Forum. And when you look at thinking about, well, what are some of the things that you focus on? Yes, there's all the, the literacies there, and then of course the competencies and things in the middle. And you may have different words for these, and you may have different ones. It's fine. Just that these all begin with C, and then of course looking at a lot of the things we talk about today, and of course this is the piece in the curriculum, isn't it, that we're finding challenging. Is the competencies and these character qualities. So we all talk about we're trying to encourage curiosity and persistence and grit and adaptability and leadership, etc., etc. And when you pick up the newspaper, and many of you, probably those of you who didn't stand up, you probably see your role as the pastoral, your responsibilities in the pastoral side. I mean, we all have responsibility, I'm sure, in a school for pastoral care. But when you look at those things on this side and you think about the challenges that you've got with mental health of kids and things, a lot of this stuff is on that side here. Well, it's actually in the curriculum. It just doesn't sit as a pastoral piece. So what are you doing in your learning programs that are actually putting some of this stuff in there? What does persistence look like in science? What does persistence look like in social studies? What's the teacher doing? What's the student doing? So your role is seeing, are these things actually even there on the big picture? Because, and many of you, of course, also teach, of course, actually in I'm sure, in a learning area. So these are the types of things that you hear and talking about. None of this is new to you. Well, I'd be surprised if it was, because the curriculum's actually been there for 10 years. Now, there's all sorts of trends and things coming in. CORE, who I work with, every year we bring out what are called these 10 trends. Notice they are trends, they are not predictions. They are trends. And when you look at some of those things that are happening there, particularly around the outside, they sort of change from time to time. Who'd heard of book chain 5 years ago? In fact, who's heard of book chain? Won't go there. But if you think of some of the things that are impacting on you and impacting structurally on what's happening, many of you are slowly joining kahuiako, communities of learning. Some of you are in them, some of you are about to come into them, some of you may be thinking about it or whatever. And then when you look on the other side, some of the cultural things that we're looking at, and this whole move and talk about things like learner agency and what that means. Have you had that discussion in your school, even what you mean by learner agency? Because you'll probably find, actually, you put people in a row, they'll be from there to there what they believe learner agency actually is. So these are all now big parts of our curriculum. And as I've said, it's not new. This is getting old. Okay? But some secondary schools still haven't even realised that we went to an outcomes curriculum in the 90s. Okay? But the big thing is, with all of that and come back, what's this curriculum about? It's about the why. Why? Sitting right at the centre. You look at the curriculum, you open up the very first page, it's about vision and values. You open up perhaps your school prospectus, hopefully it's about your vision and values. Why do you do what you do? Sitting right at the centre. These are the Simon Sinek circles. Many of you have seen these before, Julia Ratkin, people like that, right? Sitting right at the centre of what you do. And so when you think of your own school, and hopefully I've picked up all the New Plymouth high schools, you think of your school and its why, its vision, where it's going, where it's taking students. Is that absolutely, does everybody in the school, from the principal right through to the newest student who comes in at year 9, understand what your why is? And does that parrot sit on your shoulder every day saying, why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? Because you have kids in your class saying to you every day, why are you doing this? But do you ask the same questions of yourselves? Okay? And so when we think about designing curriculum, I think there's 3 key pieces that you need to think about. That the student arrives at year 9 actually with a fairly full kitty, and they put it down beside them, and it may not be a desk, it could be anywhere. And you think about how often they get to pull, you get these slides by the way, how often do kids get to pull out from that kitty some of their prior learning, some of what they've done before? Does that happen all the time? When you think about, of course, the role of the teacher, we're very focused on that because teachers, that's why teachers are teachers and parents are parents. Because you know the pedagogy, you know when to intervene, you know what is needed to actually take the student to its next place. That's your role. And then, of course, is the context. What does the community bring into your school? And actually, how do you draw on that? Because if you draw on it, all of that is how you might construct curriculum. That all these things contribute to the construction and the design, actually, of curriculum. Now, when you look at that and you think of your school, are they 3 equal circles? Is one circle huge and one doesn't even exist? Or whatever. But ask yourselves, what does this look like actually in your school? And so I just want to pick up a story here. This is Laura. This is a young woman who was actually born here in Taranaki. And I'll just read what she says. I was born in Taranaki and later moved to West Auckland. My mum and dad are both one of 8 kids, both Maori, both grew up poor and both experienced family violence. They both broke those cycles, as did their siblings. But the other things my parents have in common is that their grandparents were the last in their whānau to speak Maori. This intergenerational loss, and of course we heard, yesterday afternoon a lot about this, of identity was handed down to me. It was handed down to my parents, who handed it on to me. When I got to high school, I was determined to find my tribe. In an effort to be cool, I became Bloods. I'd wear red clothing head to toe, wag school and smoke weed. I found solace in music and used all my spare money to buy hip-hop albums. I was heading towards expulsion when two things happened. One of my teachers suggested that I train as a peer support mentor in a program for issues of sexuality, body image, etc. And then I went to my first ever music festival and saw Shapeshifter, the Black Seeds and others. For the first time, I was hearing music about life in South Pacific by people that looked like me and talked like me. I felt at one with myself and other humans in nature for the first time. So what was her curriculum experience? Okay, she's gone on, of course, to be a successful young woman and running a lot of things in Auckland in the not-for-profit side of things. Okay, one story. How many of Laura's are in your school? And are they getting a curriculum that engages them, pulls them in, and helps them? See, when you think about your vision and things, is it actually does it match your students' reality? Whose reality does it match? The senior leadership team? The teachers? Or does it match the young person's reality? And how do you know? And what do you do to find out if it does? Here's another story. Okay, this is someone I know very well. She is a round peg in a square hole. Okay? One of her teachers is sitting here who actually inspired her. Okay? Of course, her parents were both history masters, so of course she had no choice. She had to do history at school. But there were only two subjects actually she found any solace in, and that was history and English. Everything else to her was complete and utter waste of time at school. So she changed schools at the end of year 12 because she decided that the all-girls school she was at was not going to meet her needs in the following year. And she went off to university and loved it. Now, at 31, she works in Sydney, and she has ended up working in a lot of the digital sort of technology companies, as you can see there, and now she's an Asia Pacific manager for LinkedIn. She's 31. She oversees a budget of about 20 million. She works with people across India, Indonesia, that's their whole Asia Pacific region. And this is what she describes her job. Now, how many of you would understand what that job even is? Right? I often say, thank God my father's dead because that's her grandfather. That's my daughter. But she often reflects back on what she would love to have been able to do at school, but she treaded water. She often says, I used to feel I treaded water at school, except when she went to English and history, because they were her two subjects that, Now this is Matt, and Matt's another young man that I know very well. He's not my son. Matt was diagnosed with Asperger's when he was about 7. He found school very, very difficult because he hated conformity. So even putting socks on every day and going to school was a major hassle for his mother and his father and him. And so he struggled his way through school. He went to see a psychologist in Brisbane when he was about 8, and the psychologist said to him, I've got some good news for you, Matthew. You will leave school when you're 16 or 17 and you'll never go back, but your teachers will still be there. And that became Matt's mantra. Right? It became his mantra. But what did he discover along the way? He discovered music. And he's ended up first class honours degree in jazz out of Auckland University and is going on as a young man who still struggles with crowds, who still struggles performing. When you see him perform, you can still see he's down at his piano and he finds it difficult to stand up and and but he's learning and he's getting there. But he's another. How many Matts have you got in your school who are trying to find something that triggers and gets them going? So of course, let's go back now. Because when you think of there's the emotional side of these things, because these are real kids. These aren't just sort of people that sort of sit on stick figures. They are real. So when we look at curriculum and the changes over time, well, some of us have lived through many of these changes. Some of us experienced some of that as students. And of course, we now are through to 2007. Now, the 2007 curriculum lifted a couple of things up. We've always had values in our curriculum. There's nothing new there. Been there forever. But it lifted them up and put a bit more of a focus on. And of course, the key competencies came up. But that's 10 years ago. And we're going to move on from that, because since 2007, quite a few other things have gone on. There's a lot more work gone on around progressions, about what does a year's worth of learning sort of look like. There's a lot of work going on around curriculum and about place-based, because we're starting to realise that actually if kids are culturally located and start with curriculum that's actually based around place and their own place and spreads out, that actually gives them a connection. But we're also, of course, moving far more onto capabilities. And of course, we've got Rose Hipkins, my mentor, for many years up at the College of Ed, and of course she's speaking this afternoon, who's been involved in a lot of this work around this move from kind of, key competencies now to talk about capabilities. And when you look at this, those of you who are in the science area, you'll know they've already developed science capabilities. When you look at the new draft digital technologies curriculum, you'll see they're in there. That others are coming, look out. They're coming in health and PE and social sciences. There's work going on at that moment. So why is this sort of work carrying on? Because when you look at the heading for key competencies, what does it say? It says they are the capabilities for living and lifelong learning. So you've got an expert in the room down there today to kind of talk a bit more, if you want to have a chat to her, about some of this work that's been going on. And these are the science capabilities, and some of you will have seen these and will be using them. So kind of a shift, trying to bring together here some parts of the science curriculum around the nature of science, the key competencies, and of course the knowledge areas. And so this is a shift. That's what I'm saying, that curriculum never stays static. So are you still offering the same things that were being offered 10 years ago? Some of you are probably still offering things that were being offered 20 years ago. And so it evolves. And when you look at that, we've come from content curricula up to early 90s. And then we brought in all the new documents, which shifted to outcomes, in case you hadn't noticed. Now we're shifting a bit more to capabilities, and who knows what is next. So just go back to the person next to you and say to them, well, where on the continuum are we? And actually, where do we want to be? Because you make your own decisions. So I'll give you a couple of minutes to have a look at that. Okay, thank you. a good discussion to have back in your own school. Because just as Steve Mahari was challenging us yesterday, and just as others I'm sure will challenge that actually if we're still terribly focused on content, and that is the outcome that you see of your curriculum, are you doing a service to your students because of the importance of capabilities, key competencies, etc., in terms of preparing our young people for where they're going to go and whatever they want to be and do. And so it's quite interesting to me. I'm not in the digital technology curriculum at all, but I do like to look and see what's always coming out. You'll be very pleased, Melinda, that she used to be in the ministry in the technology area. So wisely has come back to be a DP in the Taranaki. Now, what's interesting here is, how many of you have read this document? You're all heads of curriculum. You see? We still see ourselves often in silos. Oh, that's the technology department. In fact, it's not even the technology department, it's that person, digital technology. You go off to the ministry, things and whatever. But there's some interesting stuff in here. Because what you're seeing here, they've still got achievement objectives are there, but what they've done, actually, they've written progress outcomes. Okay? And so, look at that, they're identifying the key learning steps that need to be developed, whatever. The other very interesting thing to me are the outcome statements. And look at what these outcome statements are trying to do, trying to describe. Hopefully you can all read that. And when you look at these outcome statements, they've written them for year 10 and for year 13, at the points at which there's a transition. Now, have you got outcome statements or any statements that actually describe, as your students transition from year 10 into year 11, exactly what they need to know, value and whatever, or whatever it's saying up there, so that they're ready to head off into, of course, the years of the qualifications and things, which Rose, I'm sure, will talk quite a bit about this afternoon. Have you got some coherence there between that? And then, of course, the end of year 13 outcomes. Have all your HODs actually got very clear statements on their vision and what they're trying to achieve actually in their learning area by the end of year 13, which is, of course, also tied into what you're trying to do as a school, because they're not isolated. You're in this school, this is what we're trying to do, and going back to that vision and things like that. Now, the other interesting thing you'll notice here is that there's the levels of the new curriculum, but they're not evenly spaced. Now, many of you know in the areas you've been in, they've never been evenly spaced, but we've always kind of thought of them as evenly spaced. So what it's saying that actually by the time a student is coming into year 11, okay, there's a bit of, some of them will still be at level 5, but coming into level 6 and level 7, level 8. So this is some of the, just to get you to think, this is some of the thinking that's going on around what we need to be thinking about in terms of being clear around what we want our students to achieve. So we're clear at the end of year 10 and we're clear at the end of year 13 where we want them to be and what we want them to know and do. Well, if we have these, what does it mean for core and options? So hands up those in this room who have at year 9 and 10 a core program and an option program. Hands up. Hands up those who don't have a year 9 and 10. Right, you're a bit lonely. So, I do a lot of curriculum reviews and things in secondary schools. Until every time we go in, there's options, year 9 options. And where are these year 9? Oh, well, everybody needs a taster. Excuse me, every student has come into your school with a kete. They've put it down when they arrived. And now you're telling them they need a starter pack in all sorts of subjects, which they should have been engaged in because they're doing the New Zealand curriculum from years 1 to 8. And yet when they arrive in secondary school, we start to make these assumptions that actually that kiddo's pretty empty. Now there's all sorts of reasons, I know why, you have options and things. But what is your reasoning behind it? Is it the convention of convenience? Is it convenient for your teachers to say, actually, I am not particularly interested in finding out that everybody's at all these different places and I'll develop a program that will actually engage them all. I'll take everyone back to, I'm being a bit facetious here, but the differentiation and things. Is there any need anymore? Why are they options? Why is it that I regularly go in and see that kids can access everything at year 9, but they choose in year 10, and many kids in this country are going through year 10 without even doing any technology at all in year 10? Is that good enough? What's Steve Mahari telling us? What's everybody trying to tell us? What our students of the future need? Why is this big emphasis on STEM or STEAM? What are we being told? Where are the gaps? And where our kids can't go or can go? They're in a lot of the options. When you look at some of these students I've just talked about, it's the options where they found themselves. So why are they options? For those kids, they're core. And as you can see, some of you are actually starting to rethink some of this. That actually, what is our core in the school? And of course, you'll get the arguments, maths need 4 hours, and social studies need 4 hours, and science need 4 hours, and English need 4 hours, because because that's why it's always been. Hang on a minute, we've all got to be at level 6 by the time we're sitting level 1 NCA. So actually, some languages people have to get kids from level 1 to level 6 in 2 years, 3 years. English teachers don't. Maths teachers don't. Are you sure that when you're giving some of these departments more time, that actually the achievement is actually getting better? Because time does not always mean that anything improves. So, go back and challenge and think about what is core in this school. Are we actually, is it just a convention of convenience? We've always done it this way, whatever. Now, of course, I know, you'll think, oh my gosh, I'll get my head bitten off, if I start to suggest some of this. All right. Now, here's another young man who I know very well. Ben, at secondary school, had 3 loves. Cars, the internet, and photography. All right. Ben couldn't do photography in year 12 because he hadn't done the arts, because that was the rule. Okay, lots of rules. Wow, are there lots of rules of what you are and allowed to do? Of course, the internet was really only kind of getting underway at schools, but of course he spent his whole life at home on it, and of course cars are not really part of a school curriculum. So he just drifted out of school by the time he's 17. He is now running a company in Queenstown with a friend of his. They're called whatever it's called, High Performance Academy. They teach people all around the world how to tune cars on the internet. Photography, internet, cars. They're so busy, they've just taken on another 3 staff in Queenstown in the last few months. They're 31. But he will say that actually his mother sent him to, reading, special reading and all sorts of things as he went through. And as he said, he always has to get someone to check whatever he's writing on the internet. But think about that again. These are jobs that you and I don't even know exist. They exist now. Okay? But he had to create the opportunity after he left school because a lot of what he did there did not meet any of that passion or need. This is Tainer, a very different story. He's a young man in Auckland, again, who basically, some of you, and of course I don't know, some of you may have taught these kids, so I've got to be careful here. He's a young man, dropped out of school, and he's ended up in second education, when he's left school. Now, what's one of the interesting things is he never did art at school, and where he is now, saying that when he arrived, he was always afraid of being wrong because that had dominated his previous experience. And he never considered himself artistic in the slightest, and he's now, through some of the work that he's doing, is becoming a young artist. Aha! Another boy on the edge. He would have been in options, but obviously he didn't choose art, or something happened around there. He may have done some art in the future. So when you think of, as you're designing and thinking about some of those students, and your own students, okay, that actually when they arrive, are they culturally connected? Is that where your curriculum starts? So that kids start with who they are, where they are, and whatever. And then, of course, you give them, of course, eventually, well, not eventually, maybe everything you do, there's an aspect in there that they can engage both locally and right up to the global, because we all say, they're going to be global citizens, etc. Oh, but hang on, there might be some barriers. All these barriers that sit there and challenge. And people say we can't do that, right? Because there's only 6 lines, and we have to, because actually the kids are going to go on and do the sciences. Yes, they need English, maths, physics, chemistry, and biology. They can do theirs. They don't have any problems, those kids. But actually, if you want to do a different combination and things, can't offer that. You've got to do something else. Or, of course, these days, actually that shouldn't be such a barrier, because look at the online world and the opportunities there are to actually allow these students, perhaps are on the edge of your curriculum, to engage in some other ways. But when you look at all of that length of learning time, oh no, we can't have 100 minutes, the maths teachers couldn't cope with that, oh God, right? But yet the schools with 100 minutes, go and have a look at what they're doing. Oh yes, we can have 90s or whatever. So there's, all these debates, because they're all going on in your schools right at this minute. But why are they going on? You've got to go right back to your why. What are we trying to achieve here? Why do we need longer learning minutes? Or why do we need shorter learning minutes? Why do we need to try and line some classes up beside each other? Why do 6 lines prevent kids doing things? Why is our school day 8:30 to 5? 8:30 to 5, well it is, we know that, clashes and things, okay? All these things. You could add many to that. So they are barriers, yes, but they are all people-made barriers. They're not barriers that the ministry puts in front of you. A lot of them are barriers that schools themselves create. Because you're not told anywhere that this is what the core is, or this is what the options are. You make all those decisions about your own students and your own children. And so what I want you to think about as you are designing is, well, what's the impact on some students? I was in a school recently where we were interviewing some Year 13 girls. She realised when we were talking to her that she was in a Unit Standards English class and she was wanting to go on to tertiary. It was only in the conversation with other kids in the room it hit her. Now, how can that happen? How can? But it's not, these things are not, one-offs. That often we go in and a kid says, well, I'm doing such and such because there was nothing else I could do, so, I don't turn up half the time, blah, blah, blah. But, of course, the school's quite happy because they've got them on a line. So you think of these kids that I'm talking about sitting out there on the edge, and then let's have a look at maybe us thinking about some of the options. I don't know whether, there's a great book, this book here, the original, it's a wonderful book, very easy to read, some of you may have read it. There's a wonderful little piece in here where they look at Nobel Prize winners, and it's quite fascinating to see that, the odds for a Nobel Prize winner relative to a typical scientist, that those that were in amateur actors and everything else are 22 times likely than an ordinary scientist. So these things, it's not like we're seeing people compartmentalised. That as you've got students who may be actually strong in science, and yes, they may be doing things in performance at school and the school production and things, but where's the recognition or anything like that come for them? So, just have a think about that. Now, we know lots of schools are beginning to play around with design and models, and I've thrown some up there, and I know we've got people in the room from Rolleston. I know we've got someone who has worked at Albany Senior Secondary, and someone I know who's worked at Hobsonville in the room, and the Rototuna people are here. Some of them, or one of them, I don't know, 3 of them. Now, oh yes, you say, it's all very well for them, because they're all new schools. Yes, isn't it fantastic that you can have this opportunity to start with a blank slate and think. Now, why is it, though, that it can only happen in new schools? But it's not. And you and I both know this, that actually those of you who went to listen to Mary Jean yesterday talking about Avonside, how they are trying, to change, the offerings. This is Wakatipu High School, which is again, a school that's going, and they have thrown up their whole Year 9 and 10 program this year, whereby, of course, you can do, as you'll see, just as an example, this happens in every subject, there are some prerequisites for kids around literacy and numeracy, and depending on some achievement data, you've got to do more of some things. But other than that, really, the whole thing opens up, as long as you've done, I think, 1 or 2 semesters in each of the learning areas. But you can end up doing, if you love science, you can do 6 sciences and 2 arts, and you can do, whatever. So they're trying to open it up and give kids a lot more opportunity. And see, these things run as Year 9 and 10, so they run over a 2-year period. And kids can opt into, you may not do anything until Visual Art 4, Spaces, that might be the only one you do, and that could be the end of next year. So, and I know there's lots of you out here who are starting to rethink and reframe. But what you've got to watch is you don't get the Starbucks syndrome. That because you've gone in and seen, because I know people like Hobsonville and Rototuna and Rolleston, they've got people pouring in there to look at what they're doing. But what you've got to watch is it's not a Starbucks thing. You can't think, oh, this is a very successful coffee shop, zoop, dum, 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 pop it in. It won't work like that. When you go into those schools, you've got to ask them all the time the why. Why are you doing this? Why was it set up this way? What is your vision? What are you trying to do here? And then aspects of that may ring true with you and aspects of it may not ring true. But you've got to make up your own mind of exactly what will work for your school. So just beware that you don't rush off into places and see things at sort of the level of what's happening there and not understand the why and what's going on. Albany Senior Secondary, if you go onto their website, it is, what do you see? This is what you see for a start. That's all it is. And then you have another wonderful piece. There's their mantra, their vision: nurture, inspire, empower. And so if you go in there and ask them why they do things, how they're doing things and all of that, and they've made lots of mistakes along the way, and they'll be pretty honest about that, particularly when they talk about the collapse day when they first started, the collapse day of the timetable. And by the way, it means that kids are only having 4 days of their main subjects and they're actually still doing really well at NCA. Not time. So, start to think very much about the coherence and things of what you're doing and your curriculum, that piece in the middle, your why, very strongly. And then, as you think about your role, is so, if you're the head of curriculum or you're in a senior leadership team, how do you lead the discussions and decisions about what students can access? Do you have a process, a good process? It's not a process of somebody coming along. I've been in some schools at the end of the year, no, about now, people say, who would like to, new courses for next year? Here, take this form and fill it out, and we'll have a look at it. Have a look at it. Actually, what comes in and what goes out of curriculum has got to be based on really good, sound curriculum decision of what your students need and want. So, when you think in your school, I want you to go back and talk to the person who leads the discussions and who's involved in these discussions. Do you have a middle leadership team that's actually involved in these decisions? Or do you have a future-focused curriculum team that looks at this? I'll just give you a minute just to quickly just talk to the person next to you about that. Okay, thank you. You see, because one of the things you'll find that it's always contentious. Curriculum is contentious at the highest level. You pick up today's paper, financial literacy should be compulsory. Driving lessons are going to be available for every student. There were dog attacks, we need, that's got to be in the curriculum. Whatever languages, it's always contentious. It's contentious at that level, just as it's contentious at your level. Okay? So you've got to be able to handle those discussions and to be able to lead, to keep people focused on, of course, the vision and things like that. I'm just going to skip through this, but one of the things I think, this is at a national level where there's two opposing sort of groups, and one is Elizabeth Rata, an academic in Auckland University, who argues, of course, that, this whole thing around knowledge. I'd love to get Rose started on this because she wouldn't stop. And so, here's a corner of one, and you'll have people in your class, in your school who say, yes, there's a problem with the curriculum, knowledge has been hollowed out. And then you get Jane Gilbert. They're both professors of education, okay? Jane works in a different university. Jane is hugely working in this whole area of the future and not just thinking about it from a curriculum and point of view. But she's saying to us, hey guys, we're going to think about this a little bit differently and a little bit further. And so, but you've got to start having these often difficult discussions in your own schools if you're going to come out of it with a curriculum that actually meets your students' needs and things. And so, of course, sometimes you've got to ask yourselves around your vision and things like that, well, here we are, but what's so important we cannot leave to chance? Have we actually got a good process to make sure that our students are getting all the things, these are these students in this school, this is what our data tells us, our quantitative data, our qualitative data, this is what the world is telling us, therefore what is the curriculum that actually our students need to be able to access to get them. And I'm going to skip through the rest of this because we don't really need it because we're running out of time. And so I want to finish with you going back and thinking strongly of your role. When you leave here tomorrow, and you're not too hungover from the dinner tonight, because some of you won't feel like architects in the morning, but you think strongly around what your role is here in terms of driving change and in terms of allowing all our students to access curriculum. Now, your themes of your conference are here. And there is a curriculum, a development. They don't look too different because you have to start right where students come from, just as you start where you and your staff come from. You have to work with that. That's who they are. I'm sorry, you can't change them. Well, yes, some of them you can because they might leave. And so the key thing to me is that you go away and start to really challenge your colleagues, yourselves, about what it is and what is the curriculum that will give your students opportunities to be who they want to be and that they don't sit out both on the edge of a school and on the edge of society. Thanks a lot. you.